Have you ever really thought about how your food gets to your plate? I mean, we all know it comes from a farm, but that's just the start of the story. The reality is, there's this hidden world of contracts and agreements, a complex web that dictates pretty much everything about what we eat. And if you want to understand our food system, you have to understand these deals.
This is the image we all have in our heads, right? The friendly farmer at a local market, you buy some fresh produce, it feels simple, it feels honest. It's kind of the romantic ideal of farming.
But here's the thing, that whole scene, as nice as it is incredibly rare today. Almost none of our food system actually works like that anymore. So that begs the question, if it seems so simple and direct, why did we move away from it? What problem was so big that it changed everything?
Well, the answer comes down to a really big problem with the market itself. That old-school open-air market model, it sounds great, but it just doesn't work when you're trying to feed millions of people who all want very specific things. It starts to break down. The core of the issue is what economists call thin markets. So picture this. You're a farmer, and you've decided to grow a really special kind of organic, non-GMO corn. The problem is, maybe only one or two companies in the whole country actually want to buy that specific corn. When you have so few buyers and sellers, there's no real market price. Things get unpredictable fast. It's a huge risk for everybody. And what's making this more and more common? Really, it's two big things. First, it's us. We, the consumers, are asking for really specific products. Organic, cage-free, all that. And second, technology is just exploding with new specialized crops and animal breeds. You can't just toss these highly specific, high-tech products onto a generic one-size-fits-all market.
So if that old open market is broken, what's the solution? Well, the answer, for better or for worse, is the agricultural contract. This became the tool that the entire industry started using to bring some order to the chaos. The best way to think about it is like this. A deal at the farmer's market is a simple handshake. A contract, though, is a detailed game plan. It lays out every single rule, the price, the quality standards, the delivery dates, all before anyone even plants a seed. And these contracts are really doing three main jobs. First, they create predictability. The farmer knows they have a buyer, and the food company knows it has a supply. Second, they share the risk, so if prices crash, everyone is a little more protected. And third, and this is a big one, they motivate the farmer to meet the exact quality standards the buyer is looking for.
Okay, but here's where it gets complicated. Not all contracts are the same, not even close. You can think of them as existing on a spectrum of control, from total farmer freedom on one end to basically zero freedom on the other.
So way over on one end, you've got that open market we talked about. The farmer is totally independent, but also faces total price uncertainty. On the absolute opposite end of the spectrum, you have something called vertical integration. This is where a company just owns everything, the farms, the animals, the processing plants. The farmer has zero independence because they're an employee.
Farm contracts operate in that huge space in the middle. You've got marketing contracts, where the farmer still owns their crops or animals and makes most of the calls, but the contract just guarantees them a buyer at a certain price. Then you have production contracts, which are a whole different ballgame. Here, the company owns the product, like the chickens, and provides the feed. The farmer is essentially paid for their labor and for the use of their barns. The control shifts dramatically.
All right, so that's the theory, but what does this actually look like for the food we eat every day? Let's take a look at how this plays out in the real world. Just to give you a sense of how dominant this is, check this out. Today, less than 2% of all pigs in the US are sold on that old-fashioned open cash market. Less than 2%. Pretty much everything else is locked into a contract.
So let's start with chicken. The poultry industry is basically the poster child for the contract system. In the chicken world, they often use this really interesting and intense system called a tournament. Basically, a group of farmers all get chicks from the same company, and they're paid based on how well they do compared to each other. Things like how efficiently their birds convert feed into weight and how many survive. It's a super competitive way to make sure everyone is performing at their absolute peak.
And this isn't just for animals. Let's switch gears and look at produce, specifically the tomatoes that become stuff like ketchup and pasta sauce.
For processing tomatoes, the contracts work a bit differently. A big ketchup company, for example, will set a price per ton and then give a farmer a contract to plant, say, 100 acres. This is great for the farmer because they know their crop is already sold, but, and this is a big but, they still bear almost all the risk. If a drought or a disease hits and the harvest is bad, that's on them.
So you can see how these contracts solve a lot of problems. They create efficiency, they create predictability, but there is a dark side. All of this efficiency can create a huge power imbalance, and the danger is often buried deep in the fine print.
One of the biggest risks for farmers is something called the holdup problem. It works like this. A company tells a farmer they'll give them a contract, but only if the farmer builds a very specific, very expensive kind of chicken barn. The farmer takes out a massive loan to build it. But then what happens a few years later when it's time to renew the contract? The farmer is completely stuck.
And this quote from the research just lays it out perfectly. That barn is only good for one thing, and both the farmer and the company know it. So the company can come back and offer a much worse deal, knowing the farmer can't really say no. They don't have any other options. They are, quite literally, being held up. Now, this system of contracts isn't set in stone. It's always changing, always adapting to new technology and new challenges. So what's next? Where are these farming deals headed?
Well, there are two huge forces on the horizon. The first is technology. Things like blockchain could lead to smart contracts that automatically track everything and make payments, which could bring more transparency to the process. And the second, of course, is climate change. Contracts are going to have to get a lot smarter about how they handle the growing risks from wild weather, droughts, and changing seasons.
Which really brings us to the final critical question. We need these contracts to run the complex, specialized food system we have today. But as our food gets even more complex and the investments get even bigger, who's really going to be holding all the cards? The farmer who owns the land, or the corporation that writes the contract?